Good Sunday evening, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Talking TSR. We're already getting off to a great start on what's going to be an amazing episode because the history professor is just cracking us up in the chat already. So this is going to be a very special, crazy episode. We're going to talk Magic the Gathering tonight.
That's
Chaos
right.
Orbs,
Yeah,
Phyrexian Dreadnoughts,
that's right. Black
Serra
Lotus,
Angels, here it
forget
comes,
all the
baby.
modules,
Yep.
we're gonna talk about it, all the good
We're
Magic
going to
the
talk Gamer
Gathering,
Crack. Here we
Moxes, all
go.
that.
Yes, Moxes. Yes. What's your favorite Mox? We're gonna do our top 5 Mox
Top
lists.
five Moxes. There you go.
There's gonna be some crossovers. So, all right. Yes, we're starting off silly, folks. Anyway, welcome. My name is Chris. I will be your co-host, and to my virtual right or left, whichever it is, as always, Rick. Rick, say hello to the folks.
Howdy, folks. Glad you could join us once again as we're having fun here already.
We are having a great time, and probably because we hung out yesterday afternoon together in the flesh,
In
in
person.
person.
Yeah,
So always a good time to go visit a game
definitely.
store, spend some money, and then have a couple of slices of pizza and just yap for a bit.
Good
So we're all done yapping. No, we're not all done yapping. We got a cool show tonight to talk about. Very few announcements, not a whole lot going on. We seem to be in a little bit of a lull here. I would like to thank all the backers who submitted monsters to the Dungeons and Denizens Kickstarter. Last Sunday was the deadline, and right now we have 2 piles of monsters that we are going through, the 5e ones, the DCC ones. We have folks going through them. We have top men on it right now, going through those submissions and trying to figure out which are going to be the 20. So stay tuned on that as we move along. But tonight we are going to be talking about, and it's right up there. We're talking about the classic 1978 adventure module D2 Shrine of the, I always say Kuo-Toa. I don't know if
Mhm.
it's Kuo-Toa, but by Mr. Gygax himself. When I say D2 Shrine of the Kuo-Toa, Rick, what is the first thing that jumps into your mind? What do
All
you
right.
think?
Well, obviously, I think of the shrine itself. The first thing I think is, of that great kind of ziggurat with the
Yeah.
Kuo-Toa goddess there, and I say Kuo-Toa too. So there, and
Ooh,
you
that's
had
the
me thinking of
Jersey way.
Indiana Jones quotes a minute ago when you said we have top men on
Yeah,
it.
top.
But yeah, this is another early module, like Chris said, 1978. This was another module that saw a tournament use and was sold at Gen Con. I believe it was Gen Con 11. What's kind of interesting is that they skipped over Descent into the depths and started the round 1 of the tournament with this module, which I think
Mm.
is kind of interesting. And then I think the next 2 rounds were both the vault. So it's kind of a and from what I've read, Bob Blake, who also ran the previous 2 Gen Con tournaments, he gave the most points to people that either passed directly through the shrine or people who basically snuck around the shrine, let's just say didn't cause too much mayhem,
Hmm.
kept a low profile, which is interesting. And at that same con, TSR was pushing Gamma World, which had been released at Origins, and also selling the player's handbook, which is kind of interesting to think of. In my mind, I always think of the player's handbook sort of preceding all the other stuff, especially Gamma World. In my mind, I have Gamma World somehow coming after the player's handbook by a couple of years, but evidently not. They were all being sold at that Gen Con, so it's kind of interesting.
Wow, that is cool. So, obviously, the first thing I think about it with this adventure is, yes, I do think about the arena and the ziggurat and the idol. But I think about the Kuo-Toa. I mean that's the first thing that jumps out to me. And that map of the big 2-page spread map of
Great
the
map.
shrine and all the cavern, all the chambers all around it and everything. That's probably the 2 biggest things that I remember of this adventure. And again, if you guys recall in our top 10 last year, I'm pretty sure D2 made my top 10. I forget exactly where it landed, but this one has always been a favorite of mine for a lot of different reasons. Again, it's a little bit longer than the typical adventures in this kind of series. This one came in at 20 pages, but it was kind of interesting that 20 pages. 2 pages were blank. They were part of the pullout. maps, so they didn't put anything on the opposite side, which I guess is good, I guess, when you're doing a pullout. But so I guess maybe it wasn't 20 pages long. I guess it was 18 pages long. Only one page of intro, a little bit less on the random encounter tables. And since we talked about those a lot last time, we're not really going to get into those again. I'm sure they're different, but they're largely the same and the same theme and everything. And yeah, so there was 3.5 pages of the random tables, which is one more higher than D1. So there actually was more. I think it was really, they just expanded it, and they took some of the information that we were getting, they kind of just organized it better in tables.
Hmm.
I thought I did notice there was a general use of tables in this adventure, in the new monsters. We had a whopping 3.5 pages of new monsters, of which there's only two. And then of course we had the overland map again. And then you had those like templated map pieces where you had the caverns that you could use, but you also had some specific ones for the two small hex encounter
Right.
areas that were leading to the shrine. So yeah, so very similar kind of package presentation to
Hmm.
D1, but at the same time, a very, very different adventure
Oh yeah.
from D1. Definitely a more cohesive environment. I mean, and definitely the environment had I think you said it best, atmosphere and descriptions. It
Hmm.
dripped with, literally
Yeah. Oh
dripped
yeah.
with descriptions.
Yeah. I think one of my favorite parts of this module is the description for Area 1, where you're walking down the
Yeah.
passage and Gygax describes all these slugs and the salt tang in the air. And he really kind of lends that undersea feeling to it. And it's a nice breath, fresh air, because after the characters have, presumably gone through D1 and encounter all trogs and trolls and frankly more, I don't want to say normal, but normal underground critters. um, I don't think any characters or players would really be expecting what they ran into here. So it's
Yeah.
such an interesting, unusual sight, because here you have a sort of almost undersea creature, but they're underground, and I just think the atmosphere here is just, it's almost Lovecraftian. It's really just so different and cool and imaginative. So yeah, top marks for the atmosphere in this.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's very Lovecraftian, and when I first, got this adventure, which was probably, um, I'm gonna say probably like 84-ish, probably somewhere in that general area, maybe 83. I was not really into Lovecraft at that point. I mean, I was like 13 years old, 12 years old. A lot of Lovecraft is not really targeted at the 10 to 14-year olds.
Yeah.
It's targeted for a little bit older than that and everything. And it just the whole horror genre was just nothing that really interested me. So I had no interest in going over to the Lovecraft section of my high school library and checking out, some of those offerings there that just didn't really do me. So this kind of presentation for me was really kind of my first introduction to it, and I
Mm,
really kind of liked it. I mean, afterwards now I can come back and I could look at that and be like, oh, I can definitely see where those inspirations were from, easily, especially,
yeah.
since Gygax mentioned Lovecraft in Appendix N.
Mhm.
So yeah, so I get it now, but you're right. I think a big part of why I liked this adventure compared to D1
Mhm.
especially is the organization of the environment, the theme, and just how everything felt right. It did not feel like a random collection of encounters. I mean,
Mhm.
I kind of envisioned, back in the 80s, the adventure I would have written back in the 80s would have been D1. It would have
Mhm.
been a bunch of
Yeah.
caves, and it would
Yeah.
have been a bunch of monsters with really no rhyme or reason. And
Yeah.
and fast forward now, the kind of adventure I would write now would be like D2. It would
Mhm.
be steeped in environment,
Yeah.
cohesiveness. There things would work off of each other. It would
Mhm.
thematically feel right and everything. So I think that's probably a great metaphor for the two different styles of these adventures. So yeah, looking at the chat here, yep, see that we have, yep, my red, wow, my dad read me my first Lovecraft at age 4, Shade of Icarus. And you know, are we surprised? I mean, his handle is Shade of Icarus. So I mean, you know, mine is not.
There
So,
you
and
go.
by the way, there's a movement to try and bring your beard back on social media, Rick.
Oh boy, I missed
Yeah,
that.
bring back Rick Beard.
Really? Just
It's
before the
trending now.
summer?
Trending. Yeah. So um yeah, what do you so let's talk a little bit about obviously the maps.
Yeah.
Was that what's that first feeling when you open up that gatefold and take a look at that gorgeous map?
I think it's an awesome map.
Yeah,
Like you said, I love the cohesive nature of it. I mean, when you flip it open, it almost has like a sort of Mayan look where you get that if you've ever
yeah,
been to, a ruin like Chichen Itza or something. I mean, that's the feel I almost get when I look at that big arena. It looks like, pictures you've seen of these ancient amphitheaters or these old places. So it has again that old ancient feeling to it.
hmm,
Feels very different, very more organized. It fits the whole religious kind of theme to the Kuo-Toa. So again, a really nice juxtaposition after all the sort of random caves in D1 to have this very organized, obviously, created structure. um I remember when I first got it, I think the under rooms gave me a little confusion at first. It took me a few seconds to kind of
yeah,
realize like how that dotted line. I mean,
yeah,
I understood it quick enough, I think, but yeah, I remember part of me was wondering like, why didn't they just give us another map for this? But I guess he
there
wanted to
you go.
show us where things went, so it was interesting. Interesting map use there.
Yeah.
Um, so what do you think about the Koatoa as a monster? Because I know we're going to go
Well,
there, I think.
well, before we go there, I want to
Okay.
talk about the map first
Oh,
because
all right,
you
go
just
for
you
it.
nailed something that I definitely want to dive into
Okay.
is those underground levels. I honestly do not understand why we did not get a whole nother level.
Yeah.
Because and I know it was weird. I mean, they didn't give as much description to those, but like
Mhm.
I was too very confused on that presentation. I mean, I don't think we've ever seen anything like that
No.
in an adventure prior, or well, there wasn't many adventures prior, but well, maybe that's the thing. Maybe this was so early. Maybe they didn't know how to do it, but like it just seemed very out of place
Yeah, I
to not
agree.
number them or label them. And the other confusing part about it is some of the rooms in the very beginning of the key, they use letters. Um
Mm,
and
mm,
and I know it's the rooms that are like repeated over and over
right.
again, so I guess he didn't want to have a whole bunch of number 11s or something like that. So he used a letter key for those. But that I found that kind of confusing too as
Mhm.
well, because you
Yeah,
know it wasn't in a numerical order. And then sometimes, and I noticed this with some of the other maps too, is sometimes like the numbering was weird too. Like you get
mhm.
up to 29 over here, and then all of a sudden
Yeah,
28
yeah,
is like, or 30 is way over there. And it's
yep,
like almost like, wait, what's it doesn't have a logical kind of a didn't
yeah.
go clockwise or something like that. So yeah, yes, I love the overall map, but I feel a little cheated that we never got. And again, maybe it was simply because he wanted a gatefold kind of a thing there,
Yeah,
and there was literally no room to put another lower level or something. And especially since you had the gatefold out, it's like, how would
yeah.
you connect those or
Yeah,
something?
it's just a weird choice. In the case of the underground passages running from the pools, I have no problem with the way they're depicted
Yes, agreed.
because you want to see, frankly, where they lay underneath, the
Yep.
main structure. And again, my only guess, aside from actual publishing considerations like space or pages or whatever,
Yeah.
is that Gygax wanted to show us where these under rooms were in comparison to the overall shrine. But again, we've had so many maps where you just had a stairway leading down, in the moat
Yeah.
house or anywhere else, frankly.
And you had to
And
figure it out.
yeah, and you understand, all right, well, the stairway goes down here on the upper map, so that's
Yep.
where it connects, and that's that. And it almost had that afterthought feeling. It didn't
Yeah.
feel quite complete when I saw those just a bunch of squares with the little dotted lines. I remember thinking that Gygax kind of like phoned that in a little bit, or it was kind of,
Yeah.
rushed in a little bit.
And knowing a little bit more about publishing now that I did, even 2 or 3 years ago,
Mhm.
yeah, it was probably a publishing move.
Yeah,
Is really probably what it came down to. I mean, it was probably like, well, if we're gonna do this the way we want to do it, it's gonna be another 4 pages to the
yeah,
adventure and maps and he probably was just like, let's just put some dotted lines in there, and
Yeah.
I'll just kind of do a description of them and everything. So that's probably
Yeah. I
how
think
that
you're
was
right.
handled.
I think
So
once you're like us and you kind of get into the publishing side of things and you're aware of page signatures and all this stuff, you
yeah.
start computing how many pages and how many pages will fit into this kind of binding, and you get into all these other considerations that affect your creative design a little bit. So,
Yeah, yeah, certainly. So yes, let's talk about the Kuo-Toa. I mean, there's a lot to talk about because we get a staggering 2.5 pages of them, and just so much there. I mean,
mhm,
there's like a paragraph of description at the very end. I kind of wish that was at the beginning.
mhm,
But you got some nice artwork, so you can kind of figure out what they are. They're kind of splashed
yeah,
all over the place with throughout the module, so you kind of figure out what they're going to look like. But I love the backstory,
mhm,
how they were originally on the surface world, and they were basically driven down into the darkness, and then they
mhm,
got cut off, and then they were slaughtered on the surface, so they were the degenerate race, and then they're kind of slip into insanity after that.
mhm,
Love that. Love the organizational of side of the design.
mhm,
War bands and
yeah,
cleric assassins. I'm like, does anybody even
yeah,
think about doing a cleric assassin? Before that, I was like, a cleric assassin, that's bizarre.
mhm,
But to good use, the whips, the monitors.
yeah,
Oh man,
yeah,
love the monitors. Monk type of. It's another thing where it was like, when I was first starting to play AD&D, coming over from D&D, it's like,
mhm,
you stick with what you're used to. You stick to your
sure,
comfort zone and all that. I wasn't playing a lot of monks, and I
yeah,
wasn't playing assassin. Well, yeah,
yeah,
I wasn't doing a lot of that. And it's like, so those were always kind of like, yeah, they were in the rule book,
mhm,
but just give me a
yeah,
fighter, give me a ranger kind of thing. So I was very fascinated with that part of
mhm.
it and everything.
And
So
it
hey,
works so well because it really
yeah,
all those classes that Gygax kind of introduces for the higher positions, and the kind of greater Kotor, if you will, like cleric assassin, it all just feeds into that idea that this is a religiously based society, and this
yeah,
is, a kind of fanatical society, and they monitor their own members, and they monitor, the adherence to decorum within the shrine and all these kind of things. It's very cohesive. It all makes sense. I love the kind of super extended description of the Koa-Toa themselves, the different abilities, the
yeah.
sticky shields, and
Yes,
unusual
yes.
weaponry,
The
which
unusual
again
weapons,
feeds into the
the
theme,
the pincer
I think, so
staff,
well.
yeah, the
Yeah.
harpoon, the pincer
I mean,
staff,
again,
and
it
yeah,
just those weapons to me are what you would expect a fishman to be using. It's
yeah,
just it's such a nice, cohesive, detailed monster design. Like I've said so many times, sometimes I've seen monster designs for different races where to me it feels like Flash Gordon, where you say, well, here are the bird men and the dog men and then this men and that. I mean, and you feel like there's no thought in it except for they're just sticking a different head on some
yeah,
humanoid, and that's that, the ape men, whatever. But here you don't just have fishmen that have a fish head. He really gives you all the detail that
yeah,
makes them unique. They don't feel like goblins. They don't feel like gnolls. They feel like something completely, utterly different.
yeah,
And again, a nice juxtaposition to trogs and the drow and the other things that you're encountering underground. They're just very completely different from those other races.
yeah,
So
and
it's just
and
such a unique race.
yeah, and the deep gnomes too. We get the full
Yeah.
description on the deep gnomes, the Snurvniblin, um, which are just
I'll let
again,
you
see,
say it.
yeah, yeah. So Snurvniblin, I could say it all night. But again, fascinating in their own part as well.
Mhm,
Obviously good guys, but they get a very similar, not as much detail, but a similar detail, with their weapons, their classes, and everything.
mhm,
And again, just enough to go with, and I think you know Gary realized it's like they're gonna need some help down in this underworld.
yeah,
I better not have everything be out to kill them, even though it might seem like it. There should be at least one species that's going to be, potential allies if they don't
mhm,
tick them off and everything. And I like that. I thought that
yeah,
worked out really, really well.
mhm,
I thought it was a nice kind of counterbalance. And keep in mind, this is before the Durgar, the dark dwarves or the deep dwarves. So
Yeah.
those I don't think came until later. I think those
Yeah.
I forget what adventure those were premiered in, but they eventually came along in the Monster Manual Volume 2, I believe. I think were they in S4?
The
Or
Duergar?
W?
No, that was the Darrow. So
That was the Darrow.
yeah,
Okay.
the
Was
Darrow were in S4.
Yeah.
The
He
Duergar, I don't think hit until later. They were kind of like I think a third edition kind of invention
No,
almost.
I thought
Somebody
they were.
correct me if I'm wrong. I
Yeah.
mean, maybe they did pop up in some early modules, but
Yeah. But anyway, but yeah, so just fascinating detail with there. And like
Mhm.
you said, I mean, we saw a snippet of that with the germline last time.
Mm, yeah,
And then this
yeah.
was kind of like this was applying it again, and it was
Hmm.
just like, wow, yeah, this model was good. And it's like it was just there's a lot of meat on those fish bones, basically,
Yeah.
to
No.
do a lot of different things. And they had some immunities and that, and then
Yeah.
the whips could generate the stroke of lightning if they all like
That's
lick
right.
hands and
That's
everything,
right.
which is kind of crazy.
Yeah.
So it's like that was unexpected. And again,
Hmm.
it goes back to um keeping players on their toes by
Yeah.
unexpected. Like you run into these fishmen, you're probably all right. You're probably like, okay, there could be clerics, but there are a
Hmm.
lot of clerics, first
Yeah.
of all. But cleric assassins, no, probably not going to get that.
Hmm.
Probably not at all. And then generating a lightning bolt between them, like
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
probably gonna really take you out of your element probably pretty quickly,
Yeah.
and really keep you on your toes. And then throw in the monk ones as well, the
Yeah.
monitors, and you're like, again,
They
it
could
just.
be tough cookies, because
Oh
they
yeah.
they described, they're immune to poison, they're
Yes.
slippery, there were things
uh,
with their eyesight.
Immune to paralyzation. They took
Yeah.
less damage from magic missiles.
Yeah, I mean, there's a
So
lot
yeah, it's
going
crazy.
on. It is interesting to me seeing how the Koa-Toa changed in the various editions of the game, because they really
Hmm.
did. They kind of went through this up and down where at some points they were rather fearsome foes, and then they
Yeah.
kind of, I don't know, it was third edition, they sort of detoothed them and they kind of brought them down.
Yeah.
And then I'm going strictly by memory here. In fourth edition, they kind of made them stronger again, and then in fifth edition, we got a kind of radical rework that I'm not frankly a fan of, and
Yeah.
they were made much more, much weaker in fifth edition. Now they were kind of brought down to kind of low level creatures again, which
Yeah.
I kind of wish they would have left them, a little stronger. But it is interesting to see how they're a race that with every edition of the game, they've really seen some creative changes.
Yeah. And
Um,
now you mentioned earlier about how the tournament scoring was based off of how you could avoid either conflict
mhm,
or just like kind of skulk your way through and not actually get into a bunch of battles. Just we talked about U2 last
mhm,
year, the second Salt Marsh adventure, Danger at
mhm,
Dunwater, and how that was a big huge layer, a big huge map, a gatefold map and everything,
mhm,
and it was a fully fleshed out layer, a monster layer and everything, but the goal was not to actually get into a fight with the
mhm.
lizard folk there. So similar here.
Yeah.
And I never really made that connection before, that this was really kind of a precursor to you too. I mean, the difference here is the Kotoa are like evil and
Mhm.
insane, and it does not take much to actually get some open combat, where the
Yeah.
lizard folk were definitely going to have a little bit more of take a little bit more of a pause before it was going
Mhm.
to be like all out warfare. So I never really made that connection for.
Mm.
And ironic that D2 U2, it's just like
Mhm.
really ironic, that kind of goes. It's like I remember even saying that, like, U2 was the first of its kind, and I'm like, I think I misspoke there. I'm like, I think this was probably the first of its kind, and I think maybe that U2, again, maybe it was done a little bit better in
Mhm.
the role playing side of it, and how you
Yeah.
can avoid the conflict versus this one, since it's kind of like, oh, they're insane, so they attack you, kind of thing. It's like, kind of
And you kind of bring up a really good point that kind of leads me into, my next big talking point or rant point, I guess, is
the rant point.
yeah, well, just for me, one area where I'm extremely torn on this module and always have been is just bottom line, kind of like, is it really a good adventure? I think, is it a great classic module that should be part of every person's library? To me, no doubt. Is it one of my favorite modules? No doubt. But when you get to the adventure side of things, as opposed to just having atmosphere or just having a cohesive setting, I get that kind of where's the beef, where I look at this and I say, is this a good adventure? And at heart, I really don't think it is. I think
Wow. Okay.
now, again, I'm going to couch that in that I'm I'm looking at it through the lens of history of when it came out, and the fact
Mhm,
that, it did come out during an era where characters seeking treasures, seeking loot,
mhm,
more exploratory modules were more of a thing,
mhm.
certainly. So, you didn't need those hard, fast reasons for doing everything, maybe as much as players and DMs even frankly look for now. And I'm a fan of exploration modules. That's the funny thing. And I could see somebody saying, well, what are you talking about, Rick? You liked B1 and that was purely exploratory. So what's your problem here? But I think for me, the big change is that this is a living, breathing place. I think it's very easy for the DM to drop some kind of plot or mission or something going on top of B1. There's almost a skeleton there that you can populate. You could put in a competing rival party. You could put in an evil wizard who's rooting around
Mhm.
Quasqueton looking for something. There's so many places you could take it, where the uniqueness of this whole series really is that all the layers from G1 right through Q1 are all living, breathing layers. There's no ruins here. There's no abandoned,
Yeah.
all these places are living, breathing layers, but that presents a real problem because now you have characters sort of stumbling into this place and they're really just blumbling into this place on the way to where they're going. It's clearly
Yeah.
not the Dro. It's probably not anything to do with the Giants, and their machinations. So I don't really see any reason why, a party wouldn't cut right through the
Mhm.
shrine. And if they don't cut right through the shrine, unless they have the wisdom to be stealthy, and a lot of parties may not, they can immediately fall prey to what I used to jokingly call the surround syndrome, which basically means you're going to bring about, by my count, a good 175 to 200 Kuo-Toa down on your heads
Mhm.
if you're not careful.
Yeah.
Um, so, I think it's something that could be very difficult for a lot of DMs to run without care. Now, again, if you have the right party that understands the stealth aspect and they're using the shrine passes or they're stealthing their way around looking for treasure and trying to keep in a decidedly low profile, I think this could be a ball. But I think there's a lot of places where this could seriously go off the rails. And you could
Yeah.
have a party that could just walk straight through, and a DM could look at this and say, "Oh my God, I prepped all night for this. My bloody players are going right through this thing, and they're not even stopping because they're gonna, they want to. The kind of players I have, they would cut right through this and just say, "We want to save our strength for the Dro," kind of thing.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I really look at this and I say, like, there's some issues here. Now, again, as a setting, if this was kind of like sold today as an underground layer
Yeah.
example or a
Mhm.
setting example, A plus, top of the line. But as an adventure, I think there are issues there.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it doesn't diminish my love of the product or the coolness of it, but I have to mention it because
Uh,
for me, it's a big thing.
yeah. I think we're gonna get into that a lot when we discuss the next adventure,
Yeah,
Vault of the
yeah,
Drow. Because Vault of the Drow, I think, even takes a step further
I agree.
in that
I
it is
agree.
more of a setting
Yeah,
as opposed to an
yeah,
adventure.
yeah.
As
People may
opposed
not
to
like what I say about Vault of the Drum.
yeah, yeah. Well, we had an interesting conversation about it too. I'm
Yeah,
looking forward to reviewing that one because
absolutely.
I had a very certain point of view from that back in the 80s that
Yeah,
I'm hoping is different now.
agreed.
But that it's a great point. All very valid points that this is again not something you got to assume if you've got 10th level characters right off the bat, you've
Mm,
got a game master that kind of knows
yeah,
what they're
good
doing
point.
probably. So and by that same token too, hopefully your players know what they're doing and what they're potentially getting into
Yeah,
because otherwise, like you said, there's going to be literally an army of
yeah,
Koatoa coming down on their heads, and it's probably not going to end well. I mean, most
yeah.
likely.
Well, I guess in first level, if you survive to 10th level in first edition, I should say,
Yeah,
especially
yeah,
with a magic
legitly.
user, you
Yeah,
probably know what you're doing. But
probably
so
do.
good point.
So
Good point.
yeah. So all right, well let's get down to our top five here for the night. Do you have any honorable mentions?
I do not.
Okay, I do. It'll be quick because we
Sure.
already talked about it in length. It's the Kuo-Toa.
Hmm.
I mean, I really was gonna put them on the list, but there was too many other cool things I kind of felt like.
Hmm.
So I was like, you know what? I think I'm just gonna put them on as kind of a as kind of an honorable mention because I'm sure we're gonna get into talking about them and all those reasons we said, all that detail, that backstory, the description, the funky weapons and the shield with the
Hmm.
glue and the war bands and everything and cleric assassins and the whips and all that. Just so that's my honorable mentions, the actual Kuo-Toa.
Hmm.
So
Cool.
do you want to go first? Do you want me to go first?
Sure.
All right.
I'll dive in here. All right. My number five, I have Area 8. That is the kind of private wing of Van Gogh, I'm going to call him. I love the detailed tactics here of this leader of the Kuo-Toa, of what he does, where he goes, where he equips himself. There's some wonderful details in this area about if he dives in the pool, how he can get the natural creatures in the pool to sort of obscure his escape. And there's even a note there about clams in the pool having an 1801 strength.
Yeah.
They can clamp down on characters. So it's just crazy amount of detail, plus some nice little details about his lair and the things in his lair, thematic treasure and decor and furniture items and his kind of throne that's sculpted with all these underwater creatures, which I love that stuff. So yeah, I like Area 8. It's one of the more detailed areas in the lair, and it's a place where the DM is given some real meat, some to work with, as far as not just playing Van Gogh as something he's going to throw himself as the characters, but really going into his tactics and even what he'll do if things go wrong, about how he'll exit the shrine and potentially kind of alert the larger Kuo-Toa, that are elsewhere as to what's happened at the shrine. So it's I love all the tactics there. So that's my number five, is the private wing.
Awesome. Great. That's a solid start. My number five, this is gonna be a little different, I think.
Okay.
So this is part of the intro. This
Mhm.
is the caution notes part of the
Mm.
intro that are actually set in italics and kind of bullet points, or number points, I forget what it is. Because they really wanted to make sure you didn't miss this part. And
Mhm.
again, our intro section on this adventure was a lot less. It was pretty much right to it. I guess they
Yeah.
figured you're in the Underdark now, you get the deal. But they made it very clear that, and again, for points that we talked about, it was almost a perfect segue. Was you need experience. You need experienced player characters. All right, so at least the ninth level. But you also need experienced players in
Yeah.
this too. And like you said, about skirt
Yeah.
around through it, skulk around, because if you just go in guns a blazing, it is probably not going to go well.
No.
They tell you you need magic items, both offensive and defensive.
Mhm.
They tell you right up front the whole teleport thing. Teleport does not work. Don't think that you're just going to teleport back to your home base, rest up,
Yeah.
and come back and everything. And I love at the very, very end, Gary says, and if this is not for your group, you should stay at home and become shopkeepers and farmers. And I'm like, imagine telling a 10th level character, like, this isn't for you.
Yeah.
You can't handle this. You should just, go get that in and start charging copper pieces for the stale bread and whatnot. It was one of those things. It jumped out to me that they really, really put that cautionary
Mhm.
thing in there. Maybe that was blowback from the fact that I don't think one of those were in there from Tome of Horrors, and Tome of Horrors probably really needed it. And it could very well be that this adventure, just a lot of people had your exact thoughts on, this is not a good adventure. This is like,
Yeah.
this could, if you play a certain way, it could go off the rails very, very quickly. So I love the fact that there was that cautionary note in
Mhm.
there in the intro, not the whole intro, just the cautionary note. So
Yeah.
my number five.
Nice. I always loved those sort of Gygaxian cautionary notes that he would put in before his adventure, and they were valid. He would
Yeah.
really call out, because bottom line, the Descent series is not easy. It's not for the
No,
timid. And
no.
it's really a big kind of campaign of attrition. Like you said, the fact that you can't just teleport out and
Yeah,
go back home and heal for a month and, stock up on new potions or whatever. Really, once the characters go into the underworld, they're kind of in for it.
they're there.
So, they're
Yeah.
in for the trek. And it really is. It's when you get down to it, to me, it's a massive kind of mini campaign of
Hmm.
attrition. So characters best beware. So yeah, great point. All right, my number four, maybe this is a terribly easy one to pick, but I couldn't resist, is the idol of Blibdoolpoop
Okay.
itself. Such an iconic thing. We talk about a lot recently about the things we think of first when we think of this module. That's one of the first things I think of is that statue, standing there with the claw and the characters seeing that as they walk through that arch. And that's one of the first things they see is this enormous idol. Talk about, something screaming at the characters, you're not in Kansas anymore.
Yeah.
And then the fact that Gygax goes and kind of details this sort of mini ziggurat level by level as far as the escalating passes and what they're good for and how you use them and how you don't and what each pass entitles the characters to. And again, like you said, if you have thinking, clever characters, they can kind of make use of these passes and really
Hmm.
get through here without a big issue and even maybe get some special treatment to a certain extent. Because one of the interesting things I think in the whole D series, and it really came into focus to me when I read D2 again recently, is this animosity between the underground races, this
Yeah.
this factionality and how players can potentially play off of that, where they can,
Hmm.
work with the deep gnomes against the Kuo-Toa or prey upon, frankly, the Kuo-Toa's hatred of the Drow, which seems very palatable. And really play the races against each other because it seems like they all hate each other. You sense that the Drow is sort of hated by everybody. That the Kuo-Toa don't like the Drow don't like the Kuo-Toa. The Mind Flayers are spying on everybody and kind of a thorn in everybody's side. And there's just you really get the sense of this whole ecosystem of races down there, where I think it's something that thinking players can make use of.
Cool.
But anyway, that's my easy number four is the idol.
Okay. Awesome. So, my number four is Area 29, the secret treasure room. And
Mhm.
Elena, if you can pop up that little map of just that area 28 and 29, that would be awesome. So this is very, very well hidden up in the top corner, the northeast corner, I believe it is, of
Yep.
the shrine. I actually I kind of like Area 28 also. So maybe this is really like
Mhm.
28 and 29. So this is like, basically you've got a well that's like 50 feet deep of like water. And then there's a hidden trap door, and that well actually hooks up to the other pools. So
Mhm.
theoretically, you could actually use that to go underneath some of the corridors and actually find your way to some of the other pools throughout the rest of the facility. But then there is a secret trap door that leads down a hall that leads to the treasure room, and this is after you've already gone through a secret door to get to this little facility,
Yeah.
which is kind of cool. And it's basically a treasure room, and
Mhm.
and then there's two chests, there's seven chests, and a wonderful breakdown of the treasure in each of the chests, and there is a lot of treasure here. I mean, this is one of those ones where it's not just laying out there. If they find it, they earned
They
it, in my
deserve it.
opinion.
Yeah.
They do deserve most of this. I mean, good luck carrying all of it, but especially since I think it's like 100,000 coins, in one in some of that. It's a big chest, by the way, that's holding all those coins. But there's an interesting trap as well, you can be triggered from, I believe it's chest numbers 1 and 6, that could actually trigger a stone block, a 10-foot by
Mhm.
10-foot stone block sliding into place, basically trapping you in the treasure room with the treasure. So, and again, you got high level characters; they could probably get out of it somehow. But and I also love the fact that this little secret area also hides one of the exits to the facility, the exits to the from the shrine that go back into the Underdark, and it's the tertiary passage.
Mhm.
That which is, you've got the primary, the secondary, and the tertiary passages. The tertiaries are the hidden ones, the ones that kind
Mhm.
of the deep gnomes are using and everything. So you've got this nice little hidden passage back there
Yeah.
that might actually, if you look at it probably is going to lead to the Kuo-Toa homeworld. It's probably not going to get you any closer to the vault, but it's interesting. I
Hmm.
like the dynamic. I think it's very interesting, kind of, three-dimensional use of everything. So that's my number 4 area. We'll call it area 28 and 29, the entrance and the treasure room.
Very nice. Well, my number 3, here we have it. Area 28 and 29,
There
the
it is.
secret passageway in the sunken chamber. You've summarized all the main points. It's such a clever area. Hard area. The characters have to go through not one but 2 secret doors to get into the secret chamber, or come in via the underground shaft.
Yep.
And then they have to find this secret plug in the floor,
Yeah.
descend into sort of this mysterious downward passage, to this little sunken room, like you said. And then there, of course, there's trapped chests in there. And I love the little detail about this sort of treasure room being a thing that's passed from leader to leader, where the
Yes.
general
Oh,
community is not aware of it. It's,
yep.
sort of
Just
like the
the
religious,
prince.
yeah, the print, like prince to prince kind of secret that they
Yep.
know where it is, which I
Got to
think is
mention
just
that.
a
Yeah.
lovely little touch.
Yep.
So just such a cool area, and really harkens back to, again, first and second edition, where it wasn't about simply making a perception check or something like that, but where
Yeah.
it was more like, the DM would stare at the players and say, tell me what you're doing, tell me what you're looking at,
Yep.
where you're
Yep.
looking, and that kind of thing, which I love. So yeah, I anybody who watches this show knows I'm a sucker for detailed treasure areas, and this one is you really get that in spades here. So nice.
All right. My number 3, this one's going to be no surprise at all to you. I don't think this is encounter area W27. This is the river crossing. I mean, this is classic. We got a
Mhm.
picture of the river crossing. I think if Elena can throw that up there. So this is cool. So you just come out the river. The river is like 80 feet deep, and I think like 80 feet across or 100 feet across, something like that. Sluggish kind of, but there is a ferryman there,
Mhm.
and it is an insane, very powerful Kuo-Toa
Mm.
monitor. So this is probably your first run-in with the Kuo-Toa. And this dude is a boss, man. 18/00
Yeah,
strength, 90
yeah,
hit points, armor class 0. I
yeah,
mean, he's all that. And
yeah.
again, he's apparently, he'll, for a small fee, he'll ferry you across the river. But he's missing a couple of his couple of quarrels short of a full crossbow bolt. There. And he might just freak out and attack. He might just jump off of the raft and leave you. And they go through some pretty detailed rules on like how hard it is to
Yeah.
actually, if you're not familiar with the sculling the barge, like, and how
Mhm.
you'll be constantly moving downstream, and there's like no chance you'll make it over to the other side. You're
Yeah,
going to be pretty much swept downstream, and there's no area to walk along the edge. It's all cavern, and
yeah.
they even say where you're going to end up. You're going to be
Oh
dumped up
yeah,
like miles down. You're going to
yeah.
end up going. So this is
Right? You can go
got the
right to the
potential.
sunless sea, I think.
Yeah, you got the potential to really, really kind of take your campaign to a different direction there. And he's got a freaking 30 plus foot long giant gar, with 65 hit points. And I checked this in the first edition monster manual. A giant gar only has 8 hit dice. 8 times 8 is 64. This thing's got 65 hit points, so you can assume it's got more hit dice probably. It's got a better armor class. It does better damage. It's like, it is a nasty, nasty monster. And of course,
Mhm.
I love, he puts the little note in there. It's like, if you're walking on the water, there's a chance the gar will attack you. And it's like, because again, your characters probably at this level can probably walk on water or the ceilings
Mhm.
or
Yeah.
fly or whatever. So I love that little touch. There's a nice little
Mhm.
touch on there that, to kind of thwart the characters and all the different moves. So that is my number 3, individual hex encounter W27, the river crossing.
Nice. I can't agree more. Well, don't hate us, folks, but we have another crossover. My number 2 area, W27, the
Oh,
encounter at the river.
I thought you would
I
have went to
love,
Snurfnublin.
I know. I think the encounter with the deep gnomes, although I love the detail of them as a monster, I think, the encounter with them is fairly pedestrian. I think it's a kind of
Hmm.
fairly normal encounter. This encounter, on the other hand, to me is I love the detail. I love the role-playing aspect. The fact that the characters are put in a position where, presumably will be trying to communicate with this. And all the rules are there that basically every time you make a request that he doesn't understand, he might lose it and just
Yeah, yeah,
flip out on you. And yet again, as we've discussed, like clever players here can kind of work this and get across. And if they don't, like you described, Gygax goes to great lengths of talking about how difficult it is to control this barge,
hmm
which again all makes sense. That this guy's doing this every day, and
yeah,
steering this barge, and then players just are jumping on this thing and trying to have their characters steer it. They're probably not going to do as good a job. So it all makes sense. It to me it
yeah,
lends some really good opportunities for role play. I could see this being a really memorable area, a real fun way for that first kind of, like you said, a mini introduction of the Kuo-Toa, to have this enormous, crazy what is the X monitor fish man sitting
yeah,
there to deal with. And then the fact that he goes and he details, what is it, the gar, in the river and
yep,
all that afterward is just is completely takes it over the top.
yes.
So yeah, this is one of my favorite, I think, like kind of mini encounter areas or whatever you want to call them in the whole Descent series. It's
I
probably
would
one of
agree.
my,
I would agree. This is another. I probably should have
yeah.
mentioned this as one of those first things I think of
Me
when
too. Yep.
when I think
Yeah.
of this adventure. I probably
Yeah.
actually think of this
I
right
agree.
after the idol.
100%.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
I
This
think
and the idol are what I think of. I
yeah,
think this and the idol and the slugs at the entrance. That's like the three things I
yeah,
think of,
uh,
you know.
and I
So
think
yeah,
this is
great
th
encounter.
this is where Gygax is at his finest. He's got
Hmm.
10th level characters and everything. What can I do to get them out of their element and kind of like,
Yeah.
who cares if you have 80 hit points and plate
Right.
mail armor and all this stuff? It's like you need to try and pilot this skull.
Hmm.
And I'm sure none of the characters can probably do that, regardless
Yeah.
of their level. And it's like, so you're basically, they could be the most powerful,
Hmm.
overpowered, full magic items as you
Yeah.
could be, and yet they just need to pilot this barge, and they probably will have trouble doing that. And then you can see it going. You can totally see it going off the
Yeah.
rails very, very quickly here.
That's
So
a really good point, because
yeah,
that kind of really adheres to this module as a whole, that it is more of a thinking person's module, though it may
yeah,
not look at it, seem like it at first appearance, that uh brute strength isn't going to cut it necessarily in this
yeah,
module. If the characters ultimately want to achieve their aims and get where they're going with a minimum of, bodily harm, they
yep.
best think things first. So yeah, good point.
Okay, cruising right along. My number two is another crossover, sort of. I'm going to call Area 7 and Area 8
Okay.
Val Gulg's throne room, if you will. He kind of has the whole private wing up there, so he has a
Hmm.
bunch of rooms and everything. But I particularly, you didn't talk about this, so I'm going to talk about the things that you did. And it's like the
Uh-huh.
throne room is cool. The detail to the throne. There's a piece of artwork for it. If you Elena, you want to throw that up there? That's the throne. The
Hmm.
throne's made out of a chain, apparently, a chain that doesn't move. And then shells, and then like literally a pile of like octopuses and stuff like that that he's sitting on. And set with coral and pearls. I love the design and I love the
Hmm.
detail of that and everything. And there's six of them, 6/6 cleric assassins in there.
Hmm.
Which is nasty.
Yeah.
And then that kind of transitions over to Area 8, which is actually where the Prince King, or whatever they call him, the Prince, I forget what they call him, the Prince something. Let's just call him the Prince. And you're right, exactly. The part that I think I enjoyed the most about this was the tactics. The
Hmm.
the most likely is not going to go well for the prince. So he's got a contingent plan, and he's got these awesome magic items that will make him even more powerful than he already is. And he's got a plan. He'll flee, and you might not have heard the last of the Kuo-Toa, and that gives it just puts a little something in the back pocket of the game master for, oh, you guys think this is too easy? It's like, okay, well, you're gonna run into this guy again. Maybe he's gonna show up in the vault or something like that. So yeah, so always fascinated by this encounter, and a pretty cool, pretty good boss monster, if you will.
Hmm.
And usually the way when I've run this adventure, how it always usually kind of ended up was, yeah, they got captured by a large group of Kuo-Toa, and then they were brought in front of the Prince King, and then then the
Mhm.
fight happened there because it was a smaller room and you couldn't have
Mhm.
hundreds of people around you and everything. So, so that is my number two area. 7 and 8, the throne room of the
Nice.
prince.
And I love all the little details that connect him to the shrine overall. The
Yeah.
fact that he's got his own fingerling pools, and the fact
Yes.
that the lobster offerings from the one area probably end up as his dinner, and these different
Yep.
details are just, it connects it all. So it's great. All right, my number one, and you mentioned it as your honorable mention, even though we already kind of visited this, is the Kuo-Toa in general
Okay. All
as a
right.
monster. To me, they're just, it's such, and to me, this is how it's done, kids. If you're going to create a monster race, it's a picture perfect example, and this could extend to the deep gnomes and a few other creatures that Gygax has laid out for us in these multi-plate descriptions. But for some reason, the Kuo-Toa always have come to my mind as one of the creatures that Gygax kind of lovingly depicted over several pages and gave us all because there's all the information for the DM there. You're
Yeah.
given their abilities, you're given, a lot of important aspects about their culture, what kind of groups you're going to face, what
Mhm.
kind of classes and organizational, you're really given a lot of information about their organizational structure and monitors. And I miss that. You don't see that as much now in products of this day as you did then, where the notes along the lines of, if you encounter 50 of these guys, they're going to be accompanied by this level of this and that kind of stuff that Gygax was kind of really known for. Maybe it came from his wargaming background where he was used to having groups of minis at the table, accompanied by leaders
Yeah.
or something. But whatever the reason, I love I love those details because it gives the DM all the information they need. That if the DM
Mhm.
is creating something and they want to have 80 Kuo-Toa in there, they can refer to this description and kind of know who should be there, and know what kind of leaders, and have some sense of the organizational, food groups that are involved. So just for the sheer important detail that's included, the loving detail in the Kuo-Toa as a monster, that I had to give it my number one spot.
Awesome. That's great. So, all right, my number one, sort of a crossover again. Not exactly though. I'm gonna call this areas 2 through 4. So definitely
Okay.
the idol is number
Hmm.
4. And that is kind of the cherry on the top. And I love the fact that there's a way that you can be teleported to the actual presence of
Yeah.
the goddess, which is just crazy, but it can happen if you don't do things right. But more the lead up to Area 4, I've always found very, very fascinating. The steps leading down to the shallower. First of all, you come across, you see the inverted part of the ziggurat, if you will, where it's
Hmm.
basically stadium seating for
Hmm.
approximately 2,000
2000. Yeah.
medium-sized creatures. So that should be the very first thing that
Hmm.
freaks out your character.
Yeah.
And A, that it's empty,
Hmm.
but the fact that there could be 2,000 of them here. I mean,
Yeah.
how many times does your characters find the barracks and they're like, all right, well, we fought 8 of the bandits.
Yeah.
Wait a minute, there's
There's two more
32
beds.
bunks here. And it's like,
Right,
and
right.
they're all being used. And then
Yeah.
it's like, you can just
So,
tell the terror in their minds, like, oh
yeah.
my God, there's
So
another
if you see
24.
2000 seats,
Yeah.
that's time to slow down and be quiet.
Exactly, exactly. So I love that part, and I'm like, I can't think of another adventure that does that,
Yeah.
that gives you that visual,
Hmm.
of you better really watch your step here because it'd be bad. And then the
Yeah.
other thing that I really, really loved about this is if you actually go on a straight path from when the steps go down to the water, actually the water's not very deep. It's funny, I don't believe they actually tell you how deep the pool is. But like they do tell you that if you stay straight, it's not that deep. So I've always interpreted it as like
Hmm.
it's knee deep, but the water is teeming with leeches.
Yeah.
And the leeches, again, doesn't matter what your armor class is, doesn't matter what you
Yeah.
are. You're taking 1 die 4, and it doesn't sound like a lot, but 1 die 4 for every 10 feet that you move.
Hmm.
Look on the thing, do the math. You're taking that damage automatically. This is the first time we've seen swarm tactics or the
Hmm.
swarm monster, I think, kind of in D&D. And
Yeah.
sadly, it took 2 more editions before we actually saw official statistics for swarms. But I've always
Yeah.
been fascinated by that. Always thought that that
Hmm.
was such a great
Yeah.
visual
Yeah.
of you're walking through this water and then like leeches just cover you and
Hmm.
you automatically lose hit points. And I just thought that that just fit really well.
Yeah.
And then of course you get up to the idol and you've got, like
Yeah.
you said, the altars, and you've got the offering plates and the different the shell system and everything, which again, if this is like one of the first few encounters and you walk in here, you have no idea what this is for. You have no
Yeah.
idea what you're doing. You're probably just taking the loot and leaving, and that's probably not going to be a good, probably not going to be a good ending. So
I'm glad you
um
mentioned this. I'm really glad you mentioned the leeches and the kind of swarm.
again,
I blew right past that, and that's part of this I've always loved. And I am a horror movie aficionado, and having grown up on a horror movies, there's always these scenes where you have groups of zombies or whatever swarming over characters, and
yeah.
it, like you said, it wasn't a thing in D&D for quite some time, the idea that you might get a whole bunch of monsters sort of swarm over somebody. So it's
Yeah,
great,
yeah,
very
I hear you.
thematic.
All right, well, that is our top five, and we are just about at the top of the hour. So, Rick, tell the folks what you got to tell them.
Sure. Well, first off, folks, as always, we're so pleased you could join us tonight and hang out and discuss one of these really early modules tonight, because this is one of our favorites. Thanks for joining us. If you enjoyed the show, please give us a like and give us a follow. If you're watching later on YouTube, subscribe and keep those comments coming. Our next show is going to come your way on May 14th, right in time for Mother's Day. And we're going to kind of honor Mother's Day, right, with a few Dro matrons, because we're going to go right along with the series and how can we not, and delve into D3 Vault of the Dro. So I hope you will join us for that.
Yeah, so you would have thought we would have planned this way, that on Mother's Day we would be talking about the Vault of the Dro and the matrons and the whole matriarchal society that is the Dro. But nope, that's not it at all. It just dumb luck again. That's the way it kind of happened and everything. So yeah, but we'll be back. Well, basically after you're tired spending all day with the family, come join us later in the evening and let's talk a
There
classic
you go.
adventure. And
Unwind with a little Dro action after that.
exactly. So, and and we are thinking about changing the name of the show based off of Sky 2's comment. We're thinking about the talking crossovers, I think is what we're, instead of talking TSR, I think we'll call the show talking crossovers with
There we go.
Rick and Chris. So definitely do that. So why don't you finish up with your pearl of wisdom, Rick?
Sure. Kind of based on, I guess, some of my points about adventure versus setting, etc. I think, a pearl for the DMs out there is to kind of cover all your possibilities and take your player breakdown into account. When you design a layer, especially like this, when it's a living, breathing layer and there's a certain purpose behind it, whether it's stealth, or something like that, that's a little beyond just killing everything in sight. Stop and think, because your players best. Stop and think, how are my players going to react here? What would their party most logically do? Would they grab all the loot at the shrine, the idol, and go running? What would they do? And take that into account, because that can really affect how your whole adventure night is going to flow. So, build your adventure around your players, and always, keep all those contingencies in mind in case things go off the rail. If you make a stealth adventure and you don't broadcast that to your players, have a backup plan.
Nice. All right. Yep. And the history professor, he is chiming in with his pearl of wisdom here, and that is throw some first edition rot grubs at them. Yes, that works every single time.
You
A
never
lot of
go
times you
wrong
don't
with
even have
rock
to
grubs.
throw them. You can just put them in something and they'll
That's
just
right.
blunder into them somehow. So you don't even, sometimes you don't have to throw them. But you know what? Putting them in little hacky sacks and having the goblins throw them, not a bad thing either. Not a bad thing either. Mix it up. My pearl of wisdom, basically it's kind of a simple one. I think it's something that Gygax really prescribed to, and you could probably see it in some of the encounters here, is always keep your players guessing.
Hmm.
When they think they've figured it out, spin it around on them somehow. Have a goblin explode for damage or something like that, or have your Kuo-Toa whips link hands and unleash a lightning
Mm.
bolt for no apparent reason. Just whatever it is is especially when you feel that they've gotten to that point of complacency where they think they know everything and they know how to, they've memorized the monster manual and they know how to take care of every threat that you send them. Get them with that, get them with those leeches in the water, or get them with
Mm,
those rot grubs or something. Just always look for a way to kind of one up on them and really, really keep them honest. And I think your players they'll appreciate that at the end of the
mhm,
day, because I think they're going to have probably a fun experience. And a lot of times when we watch movies and TV shows, especially like a heist episode or something, if the heist goes perfectly according to plan, it's not very interesting. It's
yeah,
like, there's
yeah,
always something has to go wrong. Han
mhm,
Solo has to step on the twig, and the scout trooper has to turn around, and then
mhm,
all of a sudden, we have an issue. And it's like that's so much more interesting than him just laying out both scout troopers, and then they've successfully sneak into the base, and we didn't have much conflict there. So always think about that. Always think about, take that one die roll, that natural one, and turn it into a memorable evening or something like that, or flip something on its head. So that is my pearl of wisdom for the week.
nice.
Yeah, so crossbreed. Yeah, we're gonna end on crossbreeding rot grubs and ear seekers, and inside of a purple worm. That sounds perfect.
Mm,
So, everybody, you have a wonderful rest of your evening and a wonderful week. We'll be back in 3 weeks from now, and so long for now, guys.
see you soon, folks.